Every day I think about him. Every day. Like I said, every day is a different day.
What can people do to help you?
I don't know what people can do. Just continue to pray. And justice, definitely is being served. And as she said, get them all. And I want everybody to pay for what they did to my son.
We understand a fourth arrest has been made in the murder of a man found in the Dog River Reservoir.
Diddy, hold up, it's Diddy. That's just crazy. The D, the I, the D, the D, the Y, the G, the I, the D is Diddy. Hold up, it's Diddy. Hey yo, I came in the door, I said it before.
What would make someone look at a reservoir that supplies an entire county with drinking water and decide that this was the perfect place to dump the body of a man they had murdered? Not a ditch, not an abandoned building, not some forgotten patch of woods. A reservoir, a place where people came every day without ever imagining that something horrific could be waiting beneath the surface. But in May, workers expanding the Dog River Reservoir just outside Atlanta looked into the water and discovered something that was never supposed to be there. Human remains. Someone had taken a man apart and scattered his remains through the water. And the man they found was Jamal, an Atlanta bartender whose final moments were now buried inside a question that would haunt the investigation. Who could do this to him, and why did they believe the water would keep his secret? He was 37 years old, and to a massive slice of Atlanta's nightlife, Jamal was one of the most familiar, welcoming faces you could ever find behind a bar. He wasn't a stranger to the city, he was the heartbeat of it, and yet, his life ended out here, in the dark water of a suburban reservoir. If stories like Jamal's hit you the way they hit us, you need to be following Maren Crime Stories. We cover the cases that demand to be remembered, and this one has a development hiding behind the doors of an upscale suburban home that you will not see coming. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the details of this investigation. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation took over the horrific job of trying to put a name to the man pulled from Dog River, but there was almost nothing to work with. The remains were in such a catastrophic condition that the usual methods of identification completely failed. Investigators would later admit that some pieces of his body were never recovered from the water at all. They were left holding on to exactly one fragile thread: ink. Jamal had tattoos on his body, and that ink was specific enough that it might mean something to the right person. So, deputies did the only thing they had left to do. They released photographs of those tattoos to the local media and asked the public a very simple, painful question: does anyone recognize these? Somewhere across town, someone did. A woman who had once dated Jamal was watching the news. She saw the images flash across the screen. She knew that ink immediately. She had known the man it belonged to, and the absolute second she connected those horrific dots, she picked up the phone and made the hardest call imaginable. She called Jamal's father. Think about that for a second. Think about being on the receiving end of that phone call. That single, devastating phone call is the only reason this case has a name at all. Jamal's father, Charles Parker, went straight to the detectives. He handed over his own DNA to the lab. The lab ran the comparison. The answer came back the exact way a father fears the most. The remains taken out of the Dog River Reservoir belonged to his son. Now, investigators had a name. They had a family standing right in the middle of the worst day of their entire lives. What they did not have was the answer to the only question that truly mattered: who did this to Jamal Parker? To understand how shocking this was, you have to understand who Jamal was. He worked at a spot called Ms. Icy's Kitchen and Bar, but his reputation carried far past just one address. He had poured drinks in venues all over the city. He was celebrated as a master mixologist. He didn't just hand you a drink, he mixed drinks with a massive smile. Jamal invented brand new cocktails on the spot just to watch a customer's face light up. People who knew him said that if you walked into his bar carrying the weight of a rough day, you usually walked out a little lighter than you came in. And the bar was only one side of him. Jamal made music. He made art that you could hang on a wall. He created things simply because creating was exactly who he was. His loved ones didn't reach for fancy words when they talked about him. They called him a beautiful soul, a beautiful spirit. They called him a man who loved life, and who deeply loved the people he crossed paths with along the way. He was fun, was lovable. He was a man who literally didn't meet a stranger. That is who we are talking about here. Not a case file. A person whose entire life was built around handing other people a little bit of joy, which is exactly why the next part of this story is so hard to process. The road to finding the people behind Jamal's murder didn't actually start with his murder. It started with a completely different crime. The investigation led police to a house sitting on a street called Langdale Chase. This is in one of those upscale Douglasville communities where the lawns are cut perfectly clean and the homes cost real money. Big, comfortable houses, the exact kind of place that looks like pure success straight from the curb. Absolutely nothing about this house would make a passing driver slow down. But here's the thing, this house sits less than a mile and a half from where Jamal's body was found in the Dog River Reservoir. The most ordinary-looking house on the block is the one investigators now believe Jamaal Parker walked into and never walked back out of. Deputies came to that home. They didn't just knock on the door and leave, they stayed, not for an hour, not for an afternoon, but for 4 days. For 4 straight days, they worked that property. They moved slow and methodical, the way you only work a crime scene when you already have a very strong, horrifying idea of what you are going to find inside. Picture this. You live on a quiet, expensive street where nothing bad ever happens, and for 4 days straight, it is filled with investigators, police vehicles, and yellow crime scene tape. The neighbors could only watch it unfold from their windows. Whatever they thought they knew about the people living next door, it was about to permanently change because then, the deputies started carrying things out of the house as evidence. A reciprocating saw, heavy cleaning supplies, air fresheners. You don't need a forensics background to understand what that horrific combination of items points to. A power tool made to cut through almost anything. Products designed to scrub a space entirely spotless. Heavy scents to cover whatever was left hovering in the air. Investigators firmly believe Jamal was brutally killed inside that house, and they believe someone worked incredibly hard to make absolutely sure that no trace of him survived. But that is not where this story stops, because the 2 people who lived inside that expensive home were already sitting squarely on law enforcement's radar long before anyone tied them to a dismembered body in a reservoir. If you want us to keep pulling the thread on cases where danger hides behind closed suburban doors, this is the moment to subscribe to Maren Crime Stories. The truth about what these 2 suspects were doing for a living changes the entire context of this crime, and their names are Brittany Amber Baker, she is 42, and Mario Andre Barber, he is 46. They were a couple, partners sharing that upscale house. But the law now alleges they were sharing a great deal more than just a piece of real estate. They were being investigated for something else entirely. When detectives started digging into who Baker and Barber really were, they did not find a pair of quiet, law-abiding homeowners. They found what investigators describe as a massive, working fraud operation. Inside their lives, police uncovered stolen driver's licenses, manufactured IDs, fake license plates, forged registrations. According to arrest warrants, these were people who had built a significant piece of their lives around becoming other people on paper and helping others disappear into false names, too. This deception wasn't a one-time mistake for them. The evidence heavily suggests it was their actual craft. In late May, that craft finally caught up with them. Baker and Barber were arrested and officially charged over the identity theft, the forgery, the fake documents, and drugs. Both of them, court records show, already carried lengthy criminal histories. This was nowhere near their first time moving through the justice system. Keep that in your memory. Look at the awful, sickening symmetry of it. Here were 2 people accused of spending all their time manufacturing fake identities, erasing the truth of who someone really was, and investigators now believe those exact same hands turned toward erasing something far, far more permanent. Not just a name on a piece of plastic, a human being. Jamaal Parker. While officers were still busy dealing with the fraud case, sorting through all those stolen licenses and forged paperwork, the murder case began to break wide open right underneath it. Think about how this actually collided in real time. On one track, you have a dismembered body pulled from a reservoir, finally given a name solely through a tattoo and a grieving father's DNA. On the other track, you have a couple already sitting in police custody on massive fraud charges, living in a house that homicide detectives had just spent 4 days taking apart. 2 totally separate investigations, running on 2 separate tracks. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, the tracks violently crossed. By the middle of June, deputies had seen enough evidence. Brittany Baker and Mario Barber were each officially charged with murder in the death of Jamaal Parker. But for everything that investigators believe they can legally prove, there is one enormous question that still has absolutely no answer the public can see. It is the question that makes this entire case so deeply hard to put down. How did Jamaal even know these 2 people? Authorities have not said. They have not explained to the public how a beloved, highly social Atlanta bartender crossed paths with a couple running a complex forgery scheme 30 miles outside the city limits. They have not said whether the fraud operation and the brutal killing were tied together in some way, or whether Jamal simply walked into the wrong suburban home and trusted the wrong people on the absolute wrong night. The early news reporting was very careful and honest about this massive blank space. It was not clear how the accused knew the victim at all. So, what we are left holding right now is this: a man who spent his entire life making total strangers feel welcome, ending his life inside a house belonging to two people the public still knows almost nothing about. A home full of fake identities and a massive blank space sitting exactly where the motive should be. The answers, if they ever come, will have to come inside a courtroom. The murder arrests came on a Monday.
New developments now: murder charges filed in a bizarre case after this man's body was discovered in a local reservoir. The Douglas County Sheriff's Department arrested Brittany Baker, also Mario Barber. The two were living in a home less than a mile and a half from where that body was found.
Brittany Baker and Mario Barber, who were already sitting in a jail cell on the fraud charges, now stood accused of the most serious crime there is. One count of murder each in the death of Jamal. The very next day, they were brought before a judge. Both of them pleaded not guilty. The court ordered them to be held without bond. That means there is no freedom for them while this case moves forward. There is no waiting it out at their upscale home. They sit behind bars until the justice system decides what comes next, and that was the whole of what the public got to see. No explanation, no apology, no account of what horrific events unfolded inside that house on Langdale Chase. Two people charged with taking a man's life and scattering his pieces in a lake, standing in front of a judge and saying, in so many words, it wasn't us. For a family already buried under an unimaginable weight of grief, watching that play out was its own specific kind of wound. Outside the courthouse, Jamal's people made absolutely sure that their voices carried. Relatives gathered on the steps. A chant rose up into the air. Two words, repeated again and again. Justice for Jamal. At the very center of that crowd stood his father, Charles Parker. This is the exact same man who had handed detectives his own DNA just to identify what was left of his son. Now, he was standing in front of the cameras, desperately trying to force an impossible, crushing feeling into plain words. He didn't soften any of it for the microphones. He said he wanted the killers punished. Then he said something that stops you cold. He said, I don't even think a life sentence is good. He compared the entire horrific ordeal to the kind of horror you only expect to see on a television screen, the kind that happens to other people in other towns. Never, ever to your own child. But what cut this family the absolute deepest wasn't only what was done to Jamal's body, it was what the family saw in the two accused people afterward. Jamal's family watched Baker in court. They said she acted silly. They said she acted like she had absolutely no idea what was going on when the charges were read.
She is shaking her head like and misbelieving.
They saw no regret, no remorse. They saw nothing, and then came a cruelty that most families never, ever have to picture. Because of the condition Jamal's body was left in, his loved ones couldn't even lay him to rest the normal way. There could be no ordinary funeral. There could be no proper, traditional goodbye, the exact kind of closure that every single family deserves to give the person they love. They had to turn to an online fundraiser just to try to cover the cost of burying what could be buried. And on that fundraiser page, they tried desperately to hold on to the man the world had lost. A person who loved life. A person who loved the people he met along the way. Think about the sheer cruelty of that for a second. It wasn't enough that he was taken. The brutal way he was taken literally robbed the people grieving him of even the small mercy of a real, physical farewell. So where does all of this leave Jamal Parker? He was a bartender who knew his regulars by their first names. He was a musician. He was an artist. He was a man whose very first instinct, every single time, was to make the people around him feel a little bit better than they did when they walked in. His own father put it in a way that says everything you need to know. Jamal was loved by everyone. Everyone except the two people now charged with ending his life. And in the end, this man who gave so much warmth to so many people was reduced to the coldest things imaginable. Tattoos on a public police flyer. A DNA match in a sterile lab report. Remains pulled from a reservoir 30 miles away from the bars he made feel like home. The case is still entirely open. As the court process grinds forward, more of the truth may finally come into the light. We may finally learn what really happened inside that house. How Jamaal ever crossed paths with the two people accused of killing him, and why a life that full of bright color was ended in such an ugly, violent way. Until a jury says otherwise, Baker and Barber are charged, not convicted. Those answers belong to a courtroom. But there is a quieter, terrifying truth sitting right underneath this whole story. The most dangerous moments in a life don't always come with a warning sign. Sometimes the threat doesn't look like a threat at all. It looks like an ordinary home on a nice, quiet suburban street. It looks like a familiar face. It looks like people you have absolutely no earthly reason to fear, right up until the exact moment it's already too late. Jamaal believed he was safe. He had every reason in the world to believe it. And that shattered trust is exactly the thing this case asks the rest of us to sit with. But here is the thing about betrayal. It rarely stops with strangers. Because months after Jamaal's body was discovered, investigators made a third arrest. And this is the part that will turn your stomach.
Mainly this last one, which was his so-called girlfriend.
The father of 37-year-old Jamaal Parker says murder suspect Ambria Boyd was his so-called girlfriend. He was surprised to learn she's accused of killing his son, since he says she's been so torn up over his death.
She'd been corresponding with Jamaal's mom like she didn't know what was going on.
Investigators say that's not all Boyd has been doing. They say she came forward saying an unknown caller told her the name and number of Parker's killer. Investigators determined that name was false, and Boyd was friends with the real killer, was staying at that person's home, and was with Parker a few hours before he was murdered. Parker's father thinks he knows why she came up with a false story.
It seemed like to protect herself.
Brittany Baker and Mario Barber also face murder charges. Police searched a home they were living in for 4 days after finding Parker's mutilated body in the Dog River Reservoir back in May. Charles Parker says detectives have told him to expect more arrests.
I hope to get them all.
Parker says this has torn his family up.
Only thing that really bothers me right now is how they did it. I mean, I just hope he didn't have to suffer a lot.
They arrested his girlfriend, Ambria Boyd. She was formally charged with murder, false statements, and obstruction. In the agonizing days after Jamaal was found, Ambria was actively talking to Jamaal's grieving mother. She played the role of the devastated partner, acting like she had absolutely no idea what was going on. She even went to the police with a completely fake story. She claimed an unknown caller had tipped her off to the killer's name, but investigators quickly figured out that name was entirely made up. What they discovered instead was that Ambria was actually friends with the real killer. She was staying at their home, and she had been with Jamaal just hours before he was murdered. And while Jamaal's father was desperately trying to raise money just to bury what was left of his son, someone actually set up a GoFundMe trying to raise $75,000 for Ambria's legal defense. Think about that for a second. And she wasn't the last one in handcuffs. Just days ago, authorities arrested a fourth person, David Devontae Barber. He was hit with charges of felony murder, malice murder, felony battery, and aggravated assault. Four people now sitting behind bars, accused of taking a man whose entire life was about bringing joy to others, and reducing him to pieces in a dark reservoir. If you knew Jamaal, or if you have absolutely any information about what happened to him, the Douglas County Sheriff's Office is still desperately asking the public to come forward. This investigation is active, and every single detail matters. To Jamaal's family, the ones still fighting for answers and still chanting his name on those courthouse steps, your son, your brother, your friend will not be forgotten here. If you want to help keep Jamaal's memory alive and ensure cases like this don't fade into the background, subscribe to Maren Crime Stories. Drop a comment below. How do you think two completely different worlds collided on Langdale Chase? Share this video to keep his name in the public eye, and we will see you in the next case.